Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As we approach midlife, many of us probably become a little concerned about our sexuality and well-being when it comes to the health of our reproductive system. On the program today, we're going to be talking about some of the many things that we can do to where we can kind of keep, if you will, that youthful teenage luster that we would all yearn for. After all, who wants to dive into a plethora of pharmaceuticals and tinctures that just simply probably don't work in the long term and could actually be slightly detrimental to our health? On the program today, we've had the special guest, which is known as simply the Wise Woman. She's going to be sharing with us today her new book, which is simply titled Down There, Sexual and Reproductive Health, The Wise Woman's Way. Susan Weed, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Green blessings. I'm so honored to be with you today.
You bet. Look at this nice, big, thick encyclopedia. Forget Grey's Anatomy and everything else. Let's just toss it aside. Let's get back down to earth here. Tell us about this book. This is extensive.
It is indeed. And you know, this newest book, Down There, Sexual and Reproductive Health for Men and Women, The Wise Woman Way, builds on the strengths of my previous 4 best-selling books. And this book came out in July, and it was already on the bestseller list by August. So I think we have another book that's going to be very helpful to people. We have some things that we had before. We have Grandmother Growth talking to us about her problems, but she's joined by Grandfather Growth, who talks to the men as well about their problems. And we still work with the 6 steps of healing, a word that I made up, complementary medicine, which is being replaced by integrative medicine. So certainly I am an herbalist, and I love herbs, and I give you all kinds of herbal remedies, but that's not all. There's extensive homeopathic remedies. There's visualizations. There are affirmations. There is explanation about supplements, about drugs, and about surgeries, because not everybody all the time is going to get better without using drugs and surgery. And we need to know what the best drugs are, what the best surgeries are, and what the worst ones are as well.
And not to mention, for you men out there are wonderful, rich, detailed, I guess, for lack of a better word, sketches of the vagina.
And the clitoris, and the testes, and Alan McKnight, who has done all the botanical illustrations for all of my other books, illustrated over 150 herbs for this book. And I asked him if he could do the anatomical illustrations, and he did them so well that I'm getting requests from nurses and practitioners if they could reproduce them and use them, because they really show the relationships of the organs so well. Alan McKnight just did a really beautiful job. And that was another one of the new things in this, because we had an art competition for the art that opens each chapter. And they're wonderful, evocative drawings, anywhere from, the strictly factual Betty Dodson's beautiful labia drawings that she does to real kind of, Monet emotive work having to do with the organs.
Now, there it is. See, and I wanted to bring this up for the listeners, because a lot of times when it comes to talking about sex and sexuality, people will start out, generally speaking, with this sort of a hesitation, almost embarrassment, and you get to the point where you're approaching midlife, and it's about time to cast that aside. But interestingly enough, people still carry that with them. Now, this probably comes from the old days of the church, where it was something that was taboo. It was something considered, you just don't talk about it very much. But the point is, for us to really enjoy something, as they say, sex isn't something you have to be good at to enjoy, but it's something you can really, really be enthused about if you're good at it as well. So you're bringing it out, you become a little more knowledgeable about it, and you actually start putting those inhibitions away, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a whole new world where you start thinking, I'm going to explore this a little more, not just the sexuality part itself, but also the health of it as well.
The health of it, and the good news for men is that pizza helps prevent prostate cancer.
No kidding.
No kidding, especially if you put extra garlic and anchovies on it. And the good news for women is the clitoris never ages.
Oh.
It's the only anti-senescent tissue in the body. Every other part of our body gets older, but our clitoris doesn't. When it reaches maturity, just around puberty, from then on, it never gets another day older. One of my students said, my 95-year-old mother asked me to buy her a vibrator. What should I do? And I said, buy her a plug-in model.
Hopefully it isn't a 220 model, but you go ahead and take your chances.
Exactly.
It's funny you bring this up. It reminds me of a movie. It was called Pleasantville. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Pleasantville. Yes, I do remember that.
There was a scene where the teenage girl teaches the mother how to basically masturbate in the tub. The next thing you know, a tree catches on fire. The fire department just doesn't know what they're supposed to do, because they've never had to deal with a fire before. But that's really what it is for women. You get them excited. You got fire going on there. You better be careful.
No, you don't have to be careful. It's okay.
Well, I meant in a good way.
That's a wonderful fantasy that you could catch the whole electricity pole on fire there. But, it also speaks to something that I do talk about in my book, and that is I have a whole chapter for women devoted to how to have an orgasm. Mm-hmm. Now, men look at this and they go, well, duh. And, I don't know, my experience is not that extensive, but all the men that I've met so far have figured out on their own how to masturbate and have an orgasm. Mm-hmm. And most of them before the age of 16. But there are women out there in their 20s and 30s and even older who have yet to figure it out.
And to me, that's pretty fascinating because it's something that they do have to learn how to do, right?
It is a skill that a woman needs to acquire. And even if you're out there listening, well, I already know how to have an orgasm. Let me tell you the comment of somebody who sponsored me to do a book signing down in Long Island. In her introduction, she said, I have a fabulous sexual relationship with my husband, but I just have to tell you, after reading this book, I've been having multiple orgasms, 6, 8, 9 a night. You have to read this stuff.
And do you get up and are you able to walk to the kitchen after that?
Yes.
Now, Susan, first of all, what I'd like you to do is tell our listeners you've been doing what you have been doing, especially when it comes to the Herbal Wise Women tradition, for a lot of years. Talk about how you got started, how long you've been doing this, because I want people to really hear and know, who don't know who you are, let's say, to hear the tremendous credibility that I believe you have in your background.
I got interested in herbal medicine in 1965, which is, 46 years ago, when I was pregnant with my daughter and did not want to take drugs during my pregnancy. And there was not very much information available at that time. Within a few years after that, I did manage to move up to the area where I still live, which is the area around Woodstock, New York, in the Hudson River Valley and the Catskill Mountains. And there I became familiar with the work of Ewell Gibbons, which was just being published in the late 60s, early 70s.
Grape Nuts. I remember him from the Grape Nuts commercials.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, and all those wonderful things. And he helped me to understand that while the herbs were important, the weeds were just as important as the herbs. And so I became a champion of the weeds. I was among the many jobs that I have had, as all of us have, to support ourselves. When I was a single mom especially, I worked at various health food stores. And in one of them, a new herb came in from China that was supposed to relieve all of women's problems. Now, personally, I think that women's problems are lack of child care and flat tires. But we know what they were talking about was uterine problems, ovarian problems, menstrual problems, pregnancy problems, infertility problems, and so on. So I got, maybe a couple of hundred women in the Woodstock area into taking this new herb, and they were very happy with it, and it was giving them very good results. And then the Food and Drug Administration decided that they were going to put an embargo on Chinese herbs and not let them in the country for a while. And so Dong Quai became unavailable, and I had women who were really angry at me. And I thought that was very justified, and it was at that point that I decided that not only was I going to devote myself to the plants, but I was going to devote myself to local plants. Now, one of the pleasures of getting to write a book is I get to include, as I said, over 200 different herbs, because somebody somewhere is going to be local for them. Mm-hmm. But I was just teaching down in Florida, and of course I got the opportunity to teach about saw palmetto. What have you heard about saw palmetto?
I'm familiar with the name. Again, I'm very novice when it comes to the herbs.
Yes. Many people have heard of saw palmetto, which is a kind of very small palm tree with sawtoothed edges that grows in Florida. As a matter of fact, it was once so prolific in the central part of Florida that you couldn't even get in there because of the sawtoothed edges on the leaves. And the native people used to eat the berries, which are kind of the size and the shape and the color of olives. But to white people, they really have a terrible taste and an even worse smell. And so the white people just could not get into eating them, although they fed them to their animals and saw that their animals' reproductive rates went up. The animals had sleeker coats, they were healthier, but you still couldn't get the white people to really eat these berries.
Make sure our pets, are spitting out babies, but we can't stand the taste.
Well, actually, they were feeding it to their cattle, with food animals there. And they didn't have the indulgence of having pets. And it was left to a European herbalist to come to America a couple hundred years ago and see what was going on with saw palmetto, take it back to Europe, and turn it into an extract. And it is the single leading herb sold in Europe against lower urinary tract problems and enlarged prostate problems for men, and it's gaining a reputation for helping women in the United States as well. And Dr. James Duke says that when you look at the studies and you compare saw palmetto to the most commonly prescribed drugs for these problems, that saw palmetto works better and faster with basically fewer side effects. Wow. Saw palmetto can relieve symptoms in 90% of men after 3 months of use. Proscar can relieve 50% of symptoms in 6 months. So I think the trick here is getting saw palmetto tincture. I worked with a few men while I was researching for the book, half of whom had never really heard of it, but did have lower urinary tract problems, and most of them reported results far sooner than 3 months, one even within 2 weeks. And the others were men who had tried or were using saw palmetto in capsules or tablets and were not having good effect, and when we switched them off to the tincture, they really saw the effectiveness of saw palmetto. Certainly for women, especially women who are dealing with more problematic, possibly hormonal things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, fibroids, saw palmetto, again, is starting to gain a real reputation as being a women's herb, too.
Wow. One of the things, especially when you consider this day and age, for the average American, it says they watch 2 to 6 hours of television a night. You're driving around, you can't help it, but we're bombarded by advertising. And one of the things that I've seen that's been very consistent in the advertising, especially over the last 15 years, is the aggressiveness that you tend to see in advertising that's aimed toward both men and women when it comes to the reproductive organs, not necessarily sexuality, but sort of that's underlying. There's breast cancer. There's a possibility of having hysterectomies. With men, you can't stop hearing about erectile dysfunction. It's getting to become a language that, to me, seems to be infused into the culture as though all of these things are inevitable and unavoidable, but, of course, then again, here's the solution. 20 years ago, the little blue pill, known as, I believe it was Viagra, came onto the scene. But before that, I don't know that men were really aware, are we supposed to be having something like this? And now you're seeing an aggressive campaign. To me, I say aggressive because it's just so frequent now. And they play it up as though, you're at a party and this is just supposed to happen. And the same with women, and you kind of think to yourself, if people continue to buy into this stuff, aging just doesn't seem to be very sexy, and I think it should be contrary to that. And you cover these things in your book down there.
I do, and I had exactly the same question. I said to me, what's with American men and these little blue pills? Have American men suddenly lost their moxie? Now they can't get it up unless they take a pill? What is going on here? And like you, I am old enough to remember a sexual atmosphere where men did not reach for a pill. And what I found out is so obvious that it made me feel kind of silly that I even didn't realize it. But what's really ruining most men's and many women's sex lives is drugs.
Right.
And these are prescribed drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Because after all, to be blunt, an erection is high blood pressure.
Wow.
So if you take a drug to lower your high blood pressure, it's going to be very difficult to get an erection.
Yeah, I'd imagine it would be.
Right? So, and we not only have, the standards for what is hypertension have consistently lowered over the past 20 years. And not only that, we're now diagnosing people with pre-hypertension and suggesting they take drugs to prevent hypertension without ever explaining to them that these drugs will probably interfere with their sex life. Similarly, anti-anxiety drugs, antidepressive drugs, SSRIs, and pain-relieving drugs can all interfere with libido, that is desire, can interfere with performance, and can interfere with the actual sensations of pleasure that we are getting from our sexual experience. And, of course, I would not just bring you the bad news. I always do my best to bring you the good news, too. And the good news, there are safe and very effective, simple herbal alternatives to taking any of these drugs.
Well, let's talk about some of those, because I know that our listeners would like to feel encouraged to the fact that, okay, first of all, they're kind of moving us in a direction that really becomes unhealthy, and that there really are natural alternatives. And the beauty about this is it may not just affect the one area you're focusing on. Let's say for men it's erections. I want to get off the pill, I want to do something more natural, do this. That a lot of the things that you offer don't just address that, but they could actually permeate in so many other areas of the body naturally for vibrant health that it's pretty amazing to say, why would I go the other direction?
I so agree with you about that. And one of the herbs that is a great favorite of mine for both men and women is oat straw. And this is the grass of the plant that gives us oats. So we can start right there, because we know oats helps to lower cholesterol, and it's good for the heart. And we just talked about the fact that, well, we need to have healthy blood vessels and a healthy heart in order to have that erectile tissue filled with blood, which is true for both men and women. In Europe, oat straw is one of the largest selling male herbal tonics. In India, oat straw is considered the herb of longevity. They say if you want to live a long, active, and fun life, oat straw is the herb for you. And I'm always reminded of the wonderful words of one of my students in California. And she said to me, Susan, after menopause, down there, it was dry. So dry. It was like a desert. Think sand dunes and camels. She said, then I started reading your book, New Menopausal Years, The Wise Woman Way, and you were talking about oat straw infusion. I decided that was a pretty easy thing to do. She said, and it tastes good, too. And now, she says, I have to tell you, after drinking oat straw for a few weeks down there, it's an oasis. Think date palms and dancing girls.
Everybody's swimming and having a good time in the weather.
Write that down, oat straw infusion. You don't need to get milky oats. Milky oats is used by herbalists as a sedative. It's a very effective sedative, but that's not exactly what we're looking for here. We're looking for activity, not sedation. So it's just the oat straw, and sometimes it's green, and sometimes it's gold, and sometimes it's darker than gold, and all of those are fine. What's important, though, is that we not try to take it in capsules or tinctures. What we want is an oat straw infusion. And we've talked before, and you know that I'm just a maniac about infusions, and that I think that drinking nourishing herbal infusions is one of the best ideas I've ever had. And I want everybody to drink nourishing herbal infusions. And toward that end, I now offer a free online course called Drink Your Way to Health with Nourishing Herbal Infusions. It's at my Wise Woman University. There's no charge now. There's no charge ever, and I don't even sell the herbs to make the infusions with. It's simply that I run an abundance-based business, and every person on this planet who's healthier makes my life more fun.
Well, and the other thing, too, Susan, just to let the listeners know, too, because we started following, some of the things that we had talked about in earlier programs, and it becomes really a fascinating thing for a person to go and learn. I remember we started out a few years back with it was stinging nettle, and you said what you need to do is you need to go and you buy this, you buy the dry ingredients at an herbal store, and you take and you put it into mason jars. So you went out and you bought mason jars, you fill those up with hot water, you let them sit overnight, and there's something playful, something childlike about approaching what you have here when you talk about making these infusions. And it just gets to a point that you become ravenous in your motivation to want to know more, to want to do more, to want to learn more. And, this day and age when it simply says, go get xylitol or Prozac, there's no learning there. You just have to take it, on faith that, okay, well, they know what's best for me. Well, the bottom line is what you're talking about in all of your books, and especially with this new one down there, is well, you need to know what's best for you.
What's best is not necessarily the best.
Right.
In other words, some people can change what's going on with them by literally doing nothing. One of my students took a copy of Down There, Sexual and Reproductive Health for Men and Women, The Wise Woman Way, to her gynecologist and gave it to her. And the gynecologist was a woman, opened the book to human papillomavirus and started screaming. She says, my goodness, look what this woman says. This woman says, do nothing. Does she have any idea that this stuff can cause cancer? You need to act and act promptly about this. Well, I wish that she had actually read what I had to say there, because it says that 70% of people who are diagnosed with human papillomavirus clear that virus on their own during the first 12 months with no treatment of any kind.
Wow.
And that within 24 months, 90% of all people infected with it have cleared that infection on their own with no treatment. We have 3 million women a year having their cervixes burned, frozen, cut, lasered, biopsied, none of which gets rid of human papillomavirus. But all of this is done in an attempt to deal with people's fear about the fact that this class of viruses can cause cervical cancer. But you know what? They don't just cause cervical cancer. They also cause anal cancer and throat cancer. So if we look at the rates of anal cancer among receptive gay men, they are basically the same as the rates of cervical cancer among women in India, one of the places with the highest rates of cervical cancer. Similarly, due to my opinion, some misguided sex education that permeated our education system for far too long, our teenagers were led to believe that oral contact was somehow not sex and that you were saving yourself and that was okay. But the rates of throat cancer among 20-year-olds and even some 30-year-olds is growing at an astronomical rate.
Susan, I can't help but ask you this. Why is that? I mean, why the throat cancer due to oral sexuality?
From human papillomavirus.
Okay.
As I said, it's not just that the human papillomavirus causes cervical cancer. It also causes anal cancer and throat cancer. You know, this virus, the human papillomavirus, is a whole family of viruses. And this is the one your mother warned you about. It can actually live on a damp toilet seat for up to 3 days.
Wow.
It can live on a damp towel for up to 3 days. Children get human papillomavirus. They haven't had sex. Nuns who have never had sex get human papillomavirus. Lesbians who've only ever had sex with women get human papillomavirus. We need to stop thinking about this as a sexually transmitted disease.
Now, what is it exactly? The virus itself.
Human papillomavirus is a virus. It's actually a group of viruses, and these viruses cause warts.
Okay.
They cause the familiar warts of childhood, or we've just come through Halloween time. All the witches, of course, have warts because they're very old women. And the very strong estrogens of the fertile years tend to keep those warts at bay, so both before and after, women are more prone to warts. In the genital area, they can form visible genital warts, and those are not the kinds of human papillomavirus that can cause cancer. The ones that can cause cancer cause rather invisible warts. They can be seen if the area is bathed in vinegar, but you can see how this it becomes enormously difficult to do in terms of the throat or the anus.
Mm-hmm.
That you can swab the cervix with vinegar, dilute vinegar, and look at it and see if there's white patches indicating an infection with cancer-causing types of human papillomavirus. Again, even there, most people are going to clear those, but those who don't can progress on to cancer wherever that human papillomavirus has really settled in.
Wow, fascinating.
So there are herbal antivirals, and one of the herbal antivirals is also an herbal antidepressant. So, wow, we get a great 1-2 on that one. And that's Hypericum perforatum. Hyper means above, and an icon is a religious image. And so this is the plant that was considered more sacred. It was above the religious images. Hypericum is now its name rather than hypericon. It's often called St. John's wort. I call it St. Joan's wort because the oil is so good at preventing burns, and I figure Joan knows an awful lot about burns. But what we're talking about using here is the tincture. And we're talking about using fairly lavish amounts of that tincture. That would be as much as a dropper full every hour to a dropper full 4 or 5 times a day to help to clear viral infections from the body. I'll tell you how effective this herb is. In Petri dishes, a isolated compound from this herb kills not just a human papillomavirus, but it kills HIV as well.
Really?
Yes. As a matter of fact, you can take that same compound and you can give it to animals that have been infected with HIV, and it doesn't progress. They were so excited about this that they actually got permission for stage 3 drug trials, which is to give it to human beings. And unfortunately what happens, and this is why it's so important that we use this herb as a tincture, not a tea and not a capsule, is that this one particular component, when it's turned into a drug or when it's taken in a water base, causes us to be extremely susceptible to the sun. And we can't even sit in a room that sunlight is coming into or we'll get sunburned. So this is why we've never seen it made into a drug. It's just this enormous hurdle that can't be gotten over. But with the herb, with the crude herb, shall we say, we don't see that. We don't see any sun sensitivity so long as people stick to the tincture. There is a downside to this. It's very effective antidepressant, very effective antiviral, and part of the reason that Hypericum perforatum, St. John's wort is so effective is that it really helps the liver to do its job, and it helps the liver to clear any drugs that are in the body. And this sounds all well and good unless we happen to be that person with, say, an organ transplant whose life is dependent on drugs. If we have, say, for instance, a kidney transplant, we're taking anti-rejection drugs, and we need those drugs in our blood at a certain level all the time. We take Hypericum tincture. Now, the liver works more effectively. It clears those drugs from our blood, and whammo, we're dead.
Mm-hmm.
So we do need to know what we're doing when we're using Hypericum. In general, I would say it's incredibly safe herb to use and to use in lavish quantities, but anyone whose life depends on their taking drugs might want to avoid this one.
Now, in your book, you outline the 6 steps of healing, and you talked about the first one, which is to do nothing. And, what I love about these steps is they're all very integrative. They don't separate you from your health. They actually integrate you into your health. Let's go ahead and briefly talk about the other steps that you outline in your book.
Yes, and let's just continue on with human papillomavirus. As a matter of fact, one of my quotes is that having human papillomavirus is about as problematic as having a cold. All right, and that's good because the Center for Disease Control estimates that over half of all sexually active adults have human papillomavirus. I would actually say that in terms of adults who have had human papillomavirus, I would guess that the figure is closer to 90%. It's very widespread. And so we learn about that in step 1, which is to collect information and to have a greater knowledge about the human papillomavirus, just as you're asking me wonderful questions now. We then move into step 2, engaging the energy. And Swiss herbalist Rena Neeson, who's also a homeopath, suggests homeopathic thuya, which she believes is the ground remedy, and especially when you're dealing with something like a human papillomavirus, she says rather than treat that specifically, she prefers to give a general tonifying homeopathic remedy. And then we talk about nourishing and tonifying. What can we do to nourish immunity? And I talk about herbs like St. John's wort, which we were just talking about. Also, lemon balm and hyssop made into ointments can kill human papillomavirus. Again, the treatments do not kill the virus, but these herbs can kill the virus. Mm-hmm. Then stimulate and sedate. We talk about 2 rather dangerous herbs, celandine, which is Chelidonium majus, and the orange sap of that plant can actually destroy warts and cause them to fall off. An American mandrake, Podophyllum peltatum, which is a beautiful, exotic plant and has been turned into a scientific tradition remedy, which is so severe that the side effects include scarring, death, and birth defects from external application of podophyllum. So this is not one that I suggest that people, shall we say, mess around with at home. And then we also look and see what kinds of drugs have been used. Trichloroacetic acid applied in the doctor's office is safer and as effective as podophyllum in removing warts, and less likely to leave scars. And then we talk about what kind of surgeries are recommended, especially to women. And I remind women that removal of any part of the cervix does not remove the human papillomavirus, which I think is an important thing to remember. You know, modern medicine, scientific medicine, is practiced based on fear. You should do this because you need to be afraid that you might have something. You should get a mammogram just in case you have cancer in the breast and we can find it early. You should get a PSA test just in case you have prostate cancer and we can find it early. And it's fascinating to me that the Preventative Services Health Task Force of the United States has come out against both mammograms and PSA tests. And these are both positions that I take in my book, Breast Cancer, ? Breast Health, ! The Wise Woman Way, and down there, Sexual and Reproductive Health, The Wise Woman Way. I say to men, you're more likely to be harmed by a PSA test than helped by it. I hear from a lot of women, and I know that women are often quite literally physically abused in the doctor's office, but I did not really understand how often this happens to men as well. One of the new things in this book are her stories and his stories, and one of his stories comes from a man who went in for his yearly physical. He was about to get on his boat and start sailing, and he didn't intend to come back to the United States for 2 years. And his doctor recommended a PSA test because he was over 60. Came back a little elevated. The doctor said, well, ordinarily I just, retest in 6 months, but you're going to be gone, so why don't we just do a biopsy and rule out cancer? Unfortunately, a biopsy can't rule out cancer. And this man has become impotent as a result of the biopsy.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's not an unusual. Once I got his story, I started talking to other men. Impotency, incontinence. A prostate biopsy is not just a little needle prick. They actually take 12 samples from an organ the size of a walnut.
Well, I could see why you would end up having yourself with erectile dysfunction, for lack of a better word.
And yet, if you get a PSA test, you could be on the firing line for somebody trying to scare you into having a biopsy.
Oh, my goodness.
And yet they will act like it is nothing. And I can understand that it certainly isn't major surgery, but it is enough. And again, this is why I cover all of these things. I don't just say, hey, you should avoid these things. I say, this is what you need to know about your PSA test. These are some things you can do to bring your PSA down. One of the most interesting things we find is that if we have a man with elevated PSA and he doesn't have cancer and we give him antibiotics, we can bring that PSA score right down. And so I suggest that men think about using echinacea. And I have a page about, instead of antibiotics, what you can use. And, of course, I have a help box in each one of the sections of the book because, as you say, I am very thorough. There's 50 pages of footnotes in the book, and it can be overwhelming. It's like, but I just have a problem. What can I do to deal with my problem? So there's a help box on the first or second page of each heading, each problem, and it gives you the 3 to 5 best remedies that you can use right now for that problem, and then when you feel better, you can read more about it.
Fascinating. Such an extensive book. You could talk for hours about a lot of these things. The book is called Down There. It's Sexual and Reproductive Health, The Wise Woman's Way. Susan Weed, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Give out your website information again.
I'd be happy to. Come and visit me at SusanWeed.com. Now, I keep the sun in Susan, that's S-U-S-U-N, but my daughter also bought SusanWeed.com. So spell it or misspell it. Come and visit me at SusanWeed.com. And if you want to sign up for that free course, Drink Your Way to Health with Nourishing Herbal Infusions, and I think they have it listed alphabetically under N for nourishing, go to the Wise Woman book shop. And it's the Wise Woman tradition, not the Wise Woman's tradition, because we want to keep M-A-N, man, in it. Wise Woman includes women and men. The Wise Woman tradition is inclusive. When you make it possessive, the Wise Woman's tradition, then somehow men feel left out, and I certainly would not want a single one of our male listeners to feel left out.
Oh, that English language anyway. Thank you again, Susan, for joining us on the program.
You are welcome. Green blessings to you and all of our listeners.
You bet you. Thank you. We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. We do have a free weekly e-newsletter. Sign up and get it. Also, be sure to visit us at our blog. We archive our shows there so you can enjoy listening to them at your convenience and share them with others as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Again, thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.